The knife was in my hand when my granddaughter whispered those words in mediatimen. The frosting had just started to crack under the pressure of the blade right where I'd piped it too thick trying to make the rosettes look fuller. I paused, not because of the cake, but because of her voice. It didn't tremble. It didn't beg. It landed like a flat stone, skipping once on still water. That day, the house smelled like warm vanilla and hydrangeas. My daughter Harper had brought blue and white bouquets all arranged in mason jars wrapped in twine. Aesthetic, she called it. I let her. The kitchen buzzed with the kind of soft noise that only comes when people are pretending to be at ease. Julian was pouring sparkling cider into vintage glasses he'd brought in a padded case, like he was styling a magazine shoot. Harper stood by the window, lit like she knew how to find the perfect lighting without looking. She wore cream linen barefoot, her hair pinned up like she'd just finished meditating. And me. I stood by the island with a knife in my hand and a granddaughter staring straight through me. The room shifted, not in the physical sense, but something beneath my skin adjusted. My spine caught the memory of every long shift I ever worked. My knees remembered every moment they'd held me up when I felt like collapsing. My hands went still. Maya stepped closer like she'd say it again, but she didn't have to. I heard it, and I knew. This wasn't drama. It wasn't exaggeration. It wasn't about who forgot to set the table or left me off an RSVP. It was bigger. I forced a smile and slid the knife all the way through the cake. Moist lemon poppy seed with lavender glaze. Harper's favorite, not mine. It wasn't lost on me that I was the one baking it. The guests clapped. Someone from Harper's wellness brand started filming on their phone. Julian leaned into the frame arm wrapped around Harper's waist like they were debuting a product line. Maya kept her eyes on me. I handed her a plate. She didn't take it. That's when I knew this birthday didn't belong to me. It never did. And just so we're clear, this isn't one of those stories where everything unravels at once. It starts here with a cake I didn't want in a kitchen filled with flowers that weren't for me, and a whisper from a girl who still believed I was worth warning. If any of this sounds familiar, keep listening because maybe like me, you've been smiling too long in a room where you don't belong. After the cake was served and the flashbulbs cooled, I found Maya waiting by the pantry door. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She held her phone low in her hand. Screen dimmed her thumb, hovering over the edge like she was weighing whether to press play. She didn't need to. I already knew something had cracked open, something I couldn't close back up. Julian was in the living room laughing louder than necessary, swirling his drink like a prop. Harper had disappeared down the hallway with her laptop, probably on a quick check-in with her brand team. Everything in this house had become content. Every slice of my life, every memory layered into these walls now served as curated background for someone else's narrative. Maya slid the phone into my palm without a word. I tapped the screen. At first, it was static, then Julian's voice. Low. Too casual. The kind of casual that only comes when someone feels entirely safe. She's almost there, he said. One more slip up. One more time she forgets to turn off the stove or repeats herself in public and the doctor will sign the statement. Harper's voice next. Cooler, tighter. I've got the script written. We just need her out of the way before the new product line drops. If we wait too long, it looks messy. Maya didn't flinch. I didn't breathe. I handed the phone back and stared at the bowl of lemons on the counter. For a second, I thought I might throw one. Not at anyone, just against the tile, just to hear it break. Instead, I reached for a dish towel and started wiping a perfectly clean counter. They want me gone, I said. Not to Maya, just into the room, into the air. They need your image, Maya said, but not your voice. I stood there, towel in hand, and thought of all the times I'd made room for Harper. When she had stage fright at her first recital, when she begged to transfer schools because she didn't fit in, when she cried over her first failed relationship and asked if she could come home, she came home and slowly she made it hers. The mason jars, the linen curtains, the abstract prints on the wall that looked like nothing and meant even less. I hadn't chosen any of it. I had just let it happen because that's what you do when you love someone. You let things happen until one day you look around and nothing feels like yours anymore. Maya stepped closer. There's more. She pulled out a folder from her bag, printed emails, insurance documents, a typed-up schedule for an in-home evaluation by a doctor I had never met. They were planning to have me declared unfit to transfer assets to take over everything I'd built. I didn't speak. I just folded the towel, placed it neatly by the sink, and looked out the window at the garden I used to tend. The rosemary bush had gone wild. The basil was gone. Something else had taken root, and it wasn't mine. I didn't go upstairs that night. I sat in the kitchen long after the candles burned out after Julian packed up his camera equipment, and Harper retreated to the guest room she no longer asked to stay in. I stayed right there in the corner by the stove, staring at the lines between the tiles I had scrubbed 1,000 times. The house was quiet, but not still. Pipes settled. The old oak above the back patio creaked every now and then. A car passed once slow tires over gravel. I counted those sounds to keep from thinking, but the thoughts came anyway. There was a time when Harper had flour on her nose every Saturday morning. She'd lean on the counter next to me, arms crossed, ponytail swinging, while she asked questions about what made dough rise and why some recipes used lemon zest instead of juice. I never told her I didn't know all the answers. I just let her think I did. Back then, the stove was gas and unpredictable. Sometimes it clicked too long before the flame caught. She was terrified of that sound, so I would light it before she walked in, even if I had to do it twice. I'd joke that I was braver than any fireman, and she'd laugh with her whole chest. That kind of laugh disappears with age. I hadn't heard it in years. Tonight I stood over that same stove thinking about the lemon poppy seed cake, thinking about how she had asked for it, how she had smiled when I brought it out, how she thanked me like I was a guest baker on her show, not the woman who taught her what a measuring cup looked like. The cabinets were Harper's now. She had replaced the knobs, switched the ceramic canisters for glass ones with handwritten labels. She'd painted the backsplash without asking. Julian said it looked cleaner, more modern. I said nothing. I pulled open the drawer under the stove, the one where I used to hide birthday cards and little notes Harper made when she was young. Most were gone, probably tossed during one of her reorganizing phases, but one remained, folded twice, yellowed at the edges, a heart drawn in red crayon. Inside it read, "For Mom, you make everything better." I put it back exactly where I found it. Closed the drawer quietly. The silence didn't comfort me anymore. It just confirmed what I already knew. The warmth I once felt here was no longer mine. I had been generous with space, with forgiveness, with trust. Too generous. And now the walls that once echoed laughter held only the weight of someone else's plans. When Maya came down in the morning, she found me at the table. I hadn't slept. I didn't want to. Rest wasn't safe anymore. Sleep meant waking up to a house that didn't recognize me. A life where my own daughter had rewritten the story and cast me as the complication she needed to remove. The stove clicked once, faint and sharp. I didn't move. I just watched it, waiting to see if the flame would catch. The folder Maya brought wasn't thick. It only held about 12 pages. But when I sat at the breakfast table and flipped through them, it felt heavier than any cookbook I had ever published. These weren't accusations. They were arrangements, quiet, clean, and pre-approved. There were 3 documents that stood out. The first was a form giving Harper partial access to my digital accounts. It had my signature or something that looked close enough to it. The second was a letter of intent stating that I was considering transferring the ownership of my cooking studio to a new LLC. Harper had quietly registered 2 months earlier. The third was an insurance policy I had never heard of listing Julian as the primary beneficiary in the event of my death. The payout was high, too high for a policy I didn't remember signing. I didn't speak for a long time. Maya didn't push. She sat across from me, eating toast she hadn't bothered to butter, staring out the window like she'd already made peace with what I was just beginning to understand. The kitchen felt smaller. The chairs too hard, the air too clean, like the house had already started adjusting to a version of me that wasn't here anymore. I opened a drawer I rarely used. It was where Harper kept her kitchen tools when she cooked here. The knives were all brand new, sleek stainless steel with black handles. Mine were in a box somewhere in the garage. I touched the tip of one blade just enough to feel the edge, then I closed the drawer and locked it. I had installed that lock myself 5 years ago when Harper started hosting events in the house. I'd told her it was for safety, but really I had needed one drawer that was mine. Just one. That lock had 2 keys. One I kept on my ring, the other I'd given her for emergencies. I checked my keychain. My key was still there. That night when Harper came back from yoga, she dropped her bag on the counter like she lived there. She opened the fridge, pulled out a bottle of pressed juice, and walked away without a word. I waited until she was upstairs before I checked the drawer again, unlocked. The lock wasn't broken. It had been opened with a key, the second one. I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair, hands folded, the folder still on my lap. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I went out to the garage and found the box with my old knives, dull wooden handles, a little rusted on the edges. I brought them back in and placed them on the counter. Then I locked the drawer again and kept both keys. I wasn't ready to say anything. Not yet, but something had shifted. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was about space, about the silent erasure of a life. One drawer at a time, one password, one paper, one key until there's nothing left of you in the house you built. On Wednesday morning, Harper announced she wanted to film a new episode for her wellness series. She called it a spontaneous Mother Otter segment. Her audience loved authenticity. Julian arrived 20 minutes later with his gear all packed in soft-sided cases labeled with his production brand. He greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and called me radiant. I nodded, not smiling. The kitchen had already been rearranged before I even had coffee. Harper swapped out the aprons hanging on the wall. The ones she brought had their logo on them. Julian adjusted lighting angles like we were preparing for a documentary. He asked me to stand at the left side of the counter where the light hit best. I stood where I always had in the middle. Maya helped me prep the ingredients. She didn't speak much, but her eyes didn't miss a thing. I handed her the flour. She slipped a small black camera from her pocket and set it quietly between the cookbook stand and the spice rack. No lens, no blinking light, just a black square the size of a matchbox. She placed a ceramic spoon rest in front of it and stepped away. Harper took center screen. She introduced us like I was a guest chef on her platform. She smiled wide. Her hand brushed mine when she reached for the whisk. It wasn't soft. It felt like a cue. Julian gave her a thumbs up behind the camera. We made almond scone with lavender glaze, my recipe. Harper called it an inspired fusion. I didn't correct her. Her followers would eat it up either way. Halfway through, Harper leaned toward the camera and thanked everyone for tuning in. She spoke about legacy, about generational knowledge, about the honor of learning from a parent. Her tone was syrupy. I could barely stand it. Behind the camera, Julian mouthed lines to her like they had practiced. When the camera stopped rolling, the air shifted. Harper wiped her hands. Julian handed her a drink. He asked how she thought it went. She said it felt a little flat, that I wasn't giving enough energy. Then she turned to me and smiled again, but this time only with her mouth. She said maybe we could record one more version later in the week. Something warmer, something more emotive. She said maybe I could wear something brighter or speak a little faster. Just a suggestion. I looked at Maya. Her face stayed still. But she nodded once, small and sure. Later that night, in the privacy of her room, Maya showed me the footage from the hidden camera. It had picked up everything, not just the scene. The comments after, the way Harper spoke when she thought I wasn't listening, the way Julian referred to me as the brand's nostalgic anchor. His words, not mine. They weren't building a legacy. They were building a product. And I was the packaging. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on the edge of the bed and pressed play again, watched the smile on Harper's face flicker as she turned away. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It was indifferent. Somehow that was worse. That Friday, Maya skipped her morning lecture. She stayed at the dining table with a notepad and a laptop open to 3 browser windows. I recognized one as a legal site. Another looked like a news outlet. The third showed a simple profile picture of a woman in uniform. Mia tapped the screen. Detective Noelle Avery, Financial Crimes and Elder Protection Unit based in Savannah. Quiet, precise, and hard to reach. But Maya had found her. The woman had once investigated a case where a son used forged documents to gain control of his mother's medical and financial rights. The outcome had been rare, public. The son lost everything. The mother got her name back. Maya had already sent a message. I stood in the doorway, hands in my pockets, watching her work like it was a natural part of her day. I didn't say anything. Just listened to the tapping of keys and the faint hum of the refrigerator behind us. She looked up. There's a pattern to what they're doing. It's not just you. Harper and Julian have been using your presence to build value. Emotional branding, targeting women who miss their mothers. The words landed like a flat stone. Not heavy, but final. I walked to the kitchen and turned on the kettle. The smell of chamomile filled the air. I opened the pantry. The jars were still labeled in Harper's handwriting, but behind them, buried on the bottom shelf, I found a worn recipe card. My handwriting, faded but familiar. Lemon cornbread with honey thyme butter, a recipe I hadn't used in years. I placed it on the counter just to see it again. Harper came home around noon. She wore a soft white sweater and expensive shoes, her hair in a loose braid. She walked in like she belonged to every corner of this place. She said the kitchen felt stale, that maybe we should repaint before the next shoot. Julian would call someone. I didn't answer. She looked at the counter at the recipe card. Her mouth curved slightly, not a smile. Something else. She said that one was old, that it didn't fit the brand anymore. Then she went upstairs. I stared at the recipe for a long time, then I slipped it into my apron pocket. That afternoon, Maya made another call. Noelle picked up this time. They spoke in short, quiet sentences. Mia took notes. I sat beside her, watching the lines form on the paper. Dates, document numbers, a contact at the insurance board. We were building something. Quietly, carefully, like a slow stew left on the back burner. By evening, I was tired, not from work, but from holding still. Before bed, I wrote a list, not of people to confront, but of recipes, old ones, the ones Harper had erased from the website, the ones I used to make when the house was full of real laughter, not canned applause. I folded the list and put it under my pillow. Sometimes you don't fight fire with fire. Sometimes you let them light the match and then you wait, because every role comes with a script. And sometimes the script breaks. And when it does, the truth walks in, quiet, uninvited, impossible to ignore. On Sunday morning, I took out the cast iron skillet that hadn't been used in years. The one with the worn handle and tiny crack along the edge. It had been my mother's. I scrubbed it clean, oiled it lightly, and left it to heat in the oven. That skillet had made hundreds of meals. It would make one more. Harper was away for a speaking event. Julian had followed with his camera and tripod. They wouldn't be back until Monday. I had time. Maya sat at the table sorting through files. She looked up when I pulled out the recipe box. I didn't have to say anything. That night, I announced a special live stream. I wrote the post myself. Just a quiet caption with a picture of the old skillet and a folded card. No hashtags, no filters, no Harper, just a time. Tuesday evening, one camera, one stove, one story. By the next morning, the post had more shares than anything I had ever published. Maya checked the numbers. The views were climbing. Followers left comments. Old students, former co-workers, people I didn't know, but who remembered my face. Some said they missed my cornbread. Others said they missed me. Tuesday came quietly. I wore my oldest apron, the one with stitched corners and a name tag that had faded to a soft blur. Maya adjusted the lights, set the mic, tested the stream connection. She didn't speak much. We didn't need to. Harper and Julian returned that afternoon. They didn't say anything about the setup. Julian asked if the kitchen was clean. Harper glanced at the camera and made a note on her phone. She said she would be ready by 7. At 6, I handed Maya a sealed envelope. I want this filed with the attorney first thing tomorrow, I said. She nodded. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out a list not of recipes, of names, friends, colleagues, keys, witnesses. Each one had been contacted, each one ready. Not loud, not public, but solid. At 6:30, Harper came downstairs in full makeup, her cream sweater spotless, her eyes practiced. Julian sat up beside Maya. He offered her a cold smile. She didn't return it. 7 o'clock, I stepped into the frame. No Harper, no Julian, just me and the skillet. I began with cornbread. I talked about time, about honey warmed over low heat, about how recipes are inherited but meaning is earned. 10 minutes in, Harper entered the shot. She smiled for the camera and called it a surprise visit. I nodded. Let her speak. Then I paused, looked into the lens and said, "There is one ingredient no one talks about, the one that makes or breaks a recipe. It's not salt, not time. It's truth." I lifted the envelope, placed it on the counter, then turned off the burner. The room held still. Behind the camera, Maya pressed save, then upload. That night, something shifted. Not in the air, not in the numbers, in me. The recipe was no longer for them. It was for me. And I had finally cooked something that couldn't be stolen. It started exactly at 7. No countdown, no music, just me in the frame. The kitchen lights were low, warm, nothing dramatic. I stood behind the island hands resting on the old cutting board, the skillet beside me already hot. The scent of honey and thyme lingered, barely noticeable unless you were really paying attention. It wasn't a performance. It was a return. I spoke slowly about food, about memory, about how every dish we remember has a person tied to it. I shared the history of the recipe, where it came from, how I used to make it for Harper after piano practice, how she once called it magic bread because she thought it could fix bad days. I didn't force emotion. I let it come naturally, like steam from the stove. Halfway through, Julian appeared behind the camera. He didn't speak, just gave Mare a look and took out his phone, likely checking metrics. Harper followed a few minutes later. She walked in with her usual quiet authority, already styled lips, lightly glossed hair down in soft waves. She stood just off frame, arms crossed, waiting for her cue. There was none. I didn't stop talking. I didn't change tone. I continued folding ingredients, letting the rhythm of the recipe guide the room. The viewers were climbing. Maya whispered at one point, but I kept my eyes on the bowl. Then, Harper stepped into the shot. She smiled and placed her hand on my shoulder like she was joining a family reunion. Her voice lifted as she introduced herself, thanked everyone for watching, and called this moment spontaneous and beautiful. I nodded, said nothing. She picked up a wooden spoon and stirred beside me. Julian adjusted his lens, capturing the angle. It was choreographed down to the breath, but they hadn't written the ending. Once the batter was ready, I poured it into the skillet, pressed it gently, and slid it into the oven. Then I reached below the counter and lifted a single manila folder. I set it next to the stove. My hand stayed on it for a beat longer than necessary. I said I wanted to share one final ingredient, not for the bread. For the truth. I opened the folder slowly. Inside was a printed transcript, clips from the last few months, audio, video, financial records, a notarized affidavit from my attorney confirming the authenticity of each item. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply read one line. This is what it sounds like when a family chooses silence over integrity. I closed the folder, slid it toward the edge, then looked directly into the camera. I said nothing more. I didn't need to. Harper stood frozen, her fingers still curled around the spoon. Julian lowered the camera slightly, mouth half open. No one moved. Maya ended the stream with a quiet tap. "Uploading now," she said. I turned away and walked to the oven. The timer hadn't gone off yet, but the smell told me it was ready. I pulled out the bread, golden and full, set it down on the counter. It didn't matter who stayed in the kitchen after that. The message had already left the room. The morning after the live stream, I woke before the sun. The house was still, the kind of stillness that doesn't comfort. It lingers in the corners under doors inside the cushions of chairs no one sits in anymore. The kettle clicked on the stove as I waited for it to boil. I didn't rush it. Maya was already awake. She had her laptop open screen glowing with notifications. Messages poured in, hundreds of them, then thousands, most from strangers, some from people I hadn't heard from in years, former colleagues, students. Viewers who remembered the early days of the cooking show, women who had cared for mothers who had been forgotten by their children. The words were soft and sharp all at once. "We saw you. We believe you. You reminded me of my own mother." I didn't reply. I just read them slowly, one after another, letting them settle. Harper and Julian didn't come downstairs until after 9. Harper moved quickly, her phone in her hand, typing nonstop. Her face was calm, but her jaw was locked. She poured herself coffee and sat in the far corner back to the window facing away from me. Julian paced. He mumbled about legal steps, contracts, public image. His words overlapped. They didn't land. By noon, the fallout had begun. The brand partnership announced a review. The wellness platform quietly removed Harper's profile from its homepage. 3 media outlets had reached out for comment. Maya handed me a printed copy of the first article. The headline was measured, but the subtext was clear. Questions surfaced around authenticity in influencer Mother Otter brand. I left the article on the table unopened. By late afternoon, Julian was gone. He packed quickly. Harper didn't follow him. She spent most of the day in her room. I heard her on the phone once, voice muffled, clipped like she was delivering a report. She didn't speak to me. That night, I made dinner just for Mir and me. A quiet meal, no cameras, no curated plating. We ate in the breakfast nook like we used to when she stayed with me in high school. Maya lit a candle, the cheap kind that smells faintly of cinnamon, and set it on the table without a word. When I stood to wash the dishes, I saw Harper in the hallway. She looked smaller than usual, less polished. She didn't enter the room, just stood near the edge of the archway, watching us. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She nodded once, not in apology, not in surrender, just in acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked away. I didn't follow. Later, I sat by the back window and listened to the cicadas. The air was thick summer pressing against the glass. I thought about all the ways silence can be a weapon, but also a refuge. Not everything needed to be spoken to be known. Some truths just settled in like dust, quiet, unavoidable. That night, I didn't lock the kitchen drawer, not out of trust, but because I no longer needed to. The drawer was mine again. Whether it held knives or recipes didn't matter. It held space, my space, and no one was taking it this time. By the end of the week, Harper's brand deals were either paused or canceled. The studio she had rented for product shoots stood empty, lights off, shades drawn. The production calendar disappeared from her phone. Julian didn't return. A notice came in the mail from the licensing board. A formal inquiry had been opened regarding Harper's misrepresentation in financial filings and potential exploitation of a dependent adult. The phrase was sterile, but its meaning was not. It cut straight through the silence of the house. Maya handed me the envelope without ceremony. I placed it on the coffee table beside a bowl of lemons. They had begun to soften. Harper didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't ask for explanations. She moved through the house with a kind of detachment, like someone waiting for a train that would never arrive. The confidence in her steps had faded, but not entirely. There was still calculation in the way she answered phone calls, always by the window, always in a low voice. I let her stay, not out of kindness, not out of guilt, but because something deserved to be seen all the way through. Maya received a follow-up call from Detective Avery. They had reviewed the footage. The affidavit was accepted. Statements would be taken. It wasn't about pressing charges, not for me. I wasn't looking for punishment. I was looking for clarity, for someone somewhere to say aloud that what happened had happened. That Sunday, I took back the studio. It was quiet. The door creaked the way it always had. The walls were still lined with cookbooks. Some were mine, some were borrowed. The chalkboard Harper used for branding slogans still had her handwriting on it. I didn't erase it. I turned it over and wrote something new. Legacy does not require performance. I opened the windows, the room filled with air. Then I went to the shelf and pulled down a single folder. Inside were the original articles of incorporation meant for the cooking studio signed by me years ago. Before the cameras, before the slogans, before Harper, I took them to the courthouse Monday morning. Maya came with me. The clear was polite, efficient, the papers were restored, my name returned to the record. No announcements, no ribbon cutting. Just a quiet update in a dusty registry. That night, I stood in my kitchen again, alone. The skillet was back on the stove. I had seasoned it with care. It hissed as I laid cornbread batter into its surface. The smell rose quickly, familiar, real. No camera, no microphone, just me and the sound of something becoming whole again. Harper's room stayed dark that night. She didn't come down for dinner. Maya did. We ate at the small table by the window. I didn't ask where Harper was. I didn't need to. Some things collapse with a sound. Others fall quietly like a curtain. And when they do, what remains is not revenge. It is space. It is peace. It is something earned. Not by force, by standing still long enough to be seen and not erased. 2 weeks later, I reopened the studio. There was no flyer, no announcement, just an open door and the smell of bread rising in a warm oven. The tables had been rearranged. The chalkboard wall now bore a simple message in white chalk. You are still welcome here. No names, no logos, no curated brand language, just the truth. Served quietly. I called the space something new. Not a brand, not a show, just a place. We called it the kitchen without conditions, a room where women my age could gather, not to perform but to cook, to speak, to breathe. Some came with aprons still folded from drawers they hadn't opened in years. Some brought silence. That was welcome too. Maya helped organize the sessions. She reached out to a few local centers. No social media, no press kits. Word spread like it used to. One woman at a time. Slow, steady, human. We made simple food. Cornbread, broth, potato salad passed through 3 generations. We shared recipes written in faded ink on the backs of bills and grocery lists. There were no cameras, no scheduled smiles. No one asked for before and after photos. No one measured their worth in followers. One afternoon, a woman named Lorraine brought a tin of butter cookies. She said her daughter hadn't spoken to her in 4 years. She still baked those cookies every Sunday just in case. I didn't ask for details. I handed her a plate. We stood side by side folding dough. In the quiet between instructions, I remembered how many hours I had spent trying to be needed, trying to stay useful, trying to hold on to a role long after it had turned into a costume. That weight was gone now. The studio filled with a new kind of noise, the scrape of spoons, the clink of measuring cups, the gentle hum of stories being told, not for the camera, but for each other. Harper hadn't returned to the studio since the day the papers were reinstated. She hadn't stepped into that space again, and that was all right. She had built something fragile, something curated, and when it cracked, there was nothing inside holding it up. But here in this kitchen, there was weight. There was history. There was enough salt and flour to make something lasting. Maya filmed none of it. But she kept a notebook, a plain one soft cover with lines that bent slightly from her handwriting. She said one day it might be a book. I told her it already was, even if no one read it. Some stories don't need to be published. Some are baked into the air and held in the hands of those who remember. And that is enough. The first rain of the season came quietly. No thunder, just the hush of water brushing against the window panes, gentle and steady. I stood by the kitchen sink towel in hand, drying the last plate from that morning's class. The smell of cinnamon and brown butter still lingered in the air. Maya had left early. She had an interview with a community publication, one she had pitched herself. They wanted to talk about the kitchen without conditions. She asked if I wanted to join. I told her she already knew what needed to be said. The house felt full in a new way. Not of people, not of noise, but of presence. There was nothing being hidden, nothing being staged, only things that were real and stayed. I reached into the drawer beside the stove and pulled out a folded note. It had been there for years, forgotten between old instruction cards and faded measuring charts. The handwriting was Harper's, blocky from when she was 8. Thank you for making things feel safe. I placed the note on the windowsill, left it open. That afternoon, I baked a batch of cornbread, not for a class, not for the stream, not for a brand, just because the kitchen smelled better when something warm came out of it. As I pulled the pan from the oven, I heard footsteps on the porch, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. I didn't turn. I sliced the bread slowly, placed 2 pieces on a small plate. I set one at the table. The other I kept near me. And then I sat. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Some stories end with a door closing. Mine didn't. Mine stayed slightly open. Long enough for the scent to reach whoever needed to remember it. Long enough for me to finally feel whole without needing to be seen. If you've ever been a mother, a daughter, or simply someone who stayed silent out of love, then this story was meant for you. Thank you for listening all the way through. If something in your kitchen or in your heart has ever been forgotten, remember this. You can still begin again quietly without needing to prove anything just by being yourself. If you saw yourself in this story, you're not alone, and there is still so much of your worth that no one has taken from you.